We'll just give it a minute or two, and then we'll get started. Cool, I think we can get the kick started. Hey everyone, welcome and thank you for joining the session. Hey Shaun, welcome to the session. So yeah, I think for those of you who are new to this Bayzat HR community, we'll just quickly go through what we are and what we do. So Bayzat HR community is a dedicated space where HR professionals in the region, they come together to connect, swap ideas, stop reinventing the wheel, come together to support, grow, and learn. Obviously, the community has grown significantly. It's when we started off, we were really small, and from 2 years back to now, I think the community has grown over 800 plus active team members or HR professionals in our Bayzat HR community WhatsApp group. We've also hosted quite a lot of webinars and in-person events in the UAE, where we have around 2,000 plus HR professionals coming and attending those events, exchanging ideas, sharing their experience, and so on and so forth. So those of you who are new here, obviously you will either end up seeing a QR code where you can scan and join our WhatsApp group. If not, we will be sending across an invite where you can join our WhatsApp group and be part of the community, where we support each other, help each other, and obviously the focus is to just go about learning and growing, right? And now for today's session, I remember last month we ended up asking a poll where we came up with a couple of topics, and agentic AI in talent acquisition was the one that came up. And I'm so glad that, we have Shaun here, because he's someone who's seen this space from every angle. So Shaun has spent over 25 years in HR talent acquisition. He's also led in-house teams at Barclays and First Gulf Bank. And he's advised from the outside too, first with Parisma and now at Hudson Talent, working with names like Kareem, ADNOC, MasterCard, to name a few, and many more across his 18 years of experience in the region. So when the topic got the highest number of votes, I think, connecting with Shaun was what made me kind of understand that he is the right voice for today, especially when his focus has gone, or where his focus has gone recently, which is helping navigate AI adoption inside their talent acquisition. And that's exactly the territory that we are getting into. So without further ado, Shaun, thank you so much for being here and, signing up for the webinar. And now it's over to you to walk us through what we have from an adoption standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you, Stefana. And hello, everybody on the call. I think we've got quite a few people on now. I can see the numbers moving up slowly, so we might have a few people kind of joining over the next few minutes, but we'll kick off. I think we've got about an hour today, up to an hour. We may not need all that time, but what I'll try and do is run through kind of a bit of an overview of the kind of agenda that Stefana's mentioned. I'll leave it fairly open and interactive, so I'm happy to take questions in the chat or kind of raising your hands as we go through, rather than just be kind of me talking at you for 45 minutes or so. So yeah, I'll pause at bits of pieces, and then we can kind of just get into a discussion if there's things that are top of mind for you. And yeah, let's dive in and see where we go. So there's obviously quite a large group here, so we've got about 47 people on the call. Let me share my screen. So there may well be kind of a different set of kind of understanding or kind of awareness of the kind of AI piece in TA. So I'll try my best to kind of do a bit of both sides and kind of go through some of the basics, plus also some of the things that are a bit more current and trending. So I will not be able to see you, so Sapana will have to shout out if there's any questions as I'm sharing my screen, but hopefully everyone can see this. Obviously, this is today in partnership with Bayzat, so thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you all today. It is a very kind of well-known and kind of growing community. There's a number of communities in Dubai that do similar things, but I think what Sapana and the team are doing here is really kind of very, very strong in terms of some of the networks that we have in this country. So yeah, hopefully we'll have a good session. So without any further ado, let me dive in. Sorry, the other thing about me in terms of when I do these kind of things is I tend to speak quite quickly. So I will try my best to slow down. But again, Sapana, if anybody enters into the chat that I'm talking too quickly, just shout out and give me a verbal slap and I'll try and slow down a little bit.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So I guess there's a lot of people on the call. We've got different kind of points of reference to what agentic AI is, but what I'll talk about today is kind of what we're seeing and what I'm seeing when I'm working with organizations around how people are adopting AI, what they're using it for, and also some of the things that are current around how to make sure that you're using it in the best way, and how does that look versus the old kind of ways of working in the old models. So we'll dive in quickly. I'll run through a lot of this here. This presentation will be available for you afterwards, so I'm not going to read through everything here. I'll kind of just breeze over some of the main points. So agentic AI, essentially what we're looking at currently is an explosion actually of companies, organizations and individuals starting to use AI more and more. Obviously everyone is familiar with the chat GPTs, the Claudes, Perplexities, Geminis of this world, and obviously it's been the last couple of years those kind of individual use cases have started coming more and more into the corporate environment and into companies now starting to really adopt and embed some of these things into their organizations. There's a saying here which I quite like here, which is chatbots walked so AI agents could run and multi-agent systems or agentic AI could fly. So we obviously started off way back in the day with chatbots, WhatsApp calls and pieces like that, and it's very, very quickly moved on to something a lot more sophisticated. Solutions that can kind of think, learn, and adapt as you go through. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So quick basic kind of comparison here. A lot of times when I'm talking to people about the AI adoption piece and agentic AI, a lot of people still get kind of a little bit confused around, is this just automation rebranded? There's a lot of trends that come in and out of the HR community, and a lot of things tend to get rebranded. So automation we've had for many, many years, resume passing, automatic scoring, things that enables recruiters and TA teams to do things quicker through simple algorithmic style workflows. That is automation, essentially. Agentic AI systems differ in that they are almost entire ecosystems, entire brains, where they're dealing with multiple workflows, multiple processes, and critically they can learn from the processes that they're running and improve on that basis. So really when I'm talking to organizations and when organizations are talking to me about how they use agentic AI, they more and more tend to talk about them as almost digital employees. So if you think about the individual or people in your teams across TA and the roles that they do, some of these agentic AI agents are starting to get very close to being able to do the end-to-end work activity that you would typically expect from, say, human members of your teams across both talent acquisition and wider HR. And that's something that is critical when we start to look at how to then manage that workforce. So if we think about this through the lens of these are digital employees, the way that you work with them, train them, collaborate with them would be in a similar way to how you might do that with your human counterparts if you're working in wider teams. It's a good way to think about it, because then it starts to get you into the mentality of understanding what these systems and these agents can do.
Hey, Shaun, you're breaking up.
One of the things is that we a lot of time over the last year looking at is how effective this agentic AI piece can be in the TA function. So across some of the clients we work with, across some of the organizations that we kind of take benchmark data from, there is an estimated 3x level, there's going to be a 3x growth in the use of AI agents in TA. Is clearly going to be able to be replaced with, but the type of work that teams doing and the type of work.
Shaun, can you hear us? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Is that better? Does that come through a bit better? Yeah. Okay. Fine. Okay. Perfect. Camera off. So growth in terms of this piece is expected to be large. I'll pause there just for a second. In terms of people on the call, hope that kind of initial intro makes sense, but I'd be interested just to get a quick sense check across the group. How many of you on this group are kind of already in some respects using agents or AI agents or agentic AI in any shape or form, versus say people who are very new to this and just starting to look at whether or not this could be applicable or could be useful in an organization? Any kind of thoughts or comments from the group, just as a quick pause from my side?
You can
anything, if there's anything in.
Okay,
yeah.
There's somebody who's saying we're using AI tools.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? Use AI tools, not agentic. Yep. Trusted, not using agentic AI in this way. Want ideas for use case.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, perfect. So, any other comments or questions as we go through, just let me know. I'll just move on quickly then. So some of the things that we have tried to start measuring is with these use cases, what is the output? Obviously, a lot of people are experimenting, a lot of people are trying out new things, but what we've tried to do in some of the companies that we advise and work with is look at what was your output, or what is the output that we're getting from putting these in place. So see some of the typical metrics that tend to get measured and tend to be the ones that kind of matter when relaying this back to a business, a CEO, an MD, in terms of why this is a good idea, essentially. So if you think about the recruitment process, a lot of the gains are to be made on processes that are repeatable and done in high volume. So things around your sourcing, your screening, your interview feedback, your interview scheduling, some of your offer management processes, and even some of your onboarding processes. There is a lot within the TA end-to-end life cycle that kind of falls into this criteria, and therefore is an opportunity for agentic AI to be able to give you those reductions. Some of these gains here are pretty large. There's organizations that we work with that essentially can get their time to shortlist down to almost zero, because there is an always on shortlisting process that's working in the background 24/7, which obviously humans aren't able to do. And one of the things that's a phrase that I liked from one customer that we worked with was that he likes the fact that these agents provide infinite time per candidate. So a lot of people certainly who are a bit more cautious about using agents for recruitment activities tend to think that it can reduce or degrade the candidate experience. But in a lot of the cases where organizations have actually started to use these agents for candidate engagement, they actually see an uptick in NPS scores and engagement, because essentially these agents are available 24/7. A candidate, for example, can ask a question about the company they're applying to, or ask a question about the role at any time of the day, at any time, and there will always be someone, an agent essentially, available to answer that question, versus say a human recruiter is going to have very little time to spend on candidate engagement to that kind of degree. on a regular basis, on a consistent basis. So actually, a lot of people think that candidate engagement, candidate experience goes down. I think that is just a product of something being new and something that needs more adoption before it becomes almost sort of accepted practice. But yeah, certainly with some of the pilots and some of the organizations that we see doing this, there is an increase in candidate engagement, certainly from kind of a knowledge perspective. I've nabbed a whole bunch of things from a guy that I follow. Kevin Wheeler, I don't know if anybody knows of this name, is a quite well-known name in the space for talent acquisition. He's a bit of a futurist, so he spends a lot of time looking at talent acquisition globally, based out of the UK, and looking at where things are headed. So I'm not going to kind of go through all of these, but this is his top 10 predictions for TA this year with respect to how AI is being adopted. Some of the things to call out here is that one of the things that he believes is that TA is going to be going through an evolution, not just in terms of the way that they work with AI, but then how that impacts that function as a function of what those people are doing within those teams. So, one of the simplest examples he said was, TA at the moment is very primarily externally driven. So a lot of the time we're looking for external talent, external candidates. A lot of our work is done in the external market. He sees that shifting quite significantly to an internal model where, with the ability to bring and work with data, manipulate data, which his agents can do far quicker, far better, and far more broadly than humans could, you'll be able to get much richer data sets internally to be able to really superpower what you do from an internal mobility perspective. A lot of internal mobility tends to be sometimes a bit of an afterthought in TA. Sometimes it's not even part of the TA function itself. It's managed by the HR teams. But with the advent of agents being able to collect vast amounts of data across different parts of HR, be that your L&D departments, your reward departments, your talent acquisition departments, that data can now be manipulated and designed in a way that it can really give you really good outputs and inform really good insights around how you can then make the most of your internal talents, which will then in the future reduce your reliance on needing to go externally. So there's a piece there which I thought was quite interesting. There's a bunch of other things here which I won't go through, but there's a list there that you can kind of read at your leisure if you decide to download the presentation here. But essentially what he's saying is that this is going to be a fundamental reset for TA. The function itself is going to change, and obviously the people and the roles within them is going to change significantly as well. Pause there quickly. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts from the group before I move on?
Yeah, so we have David who's saying he's trying to use via Zapier, which is AI tools. Then Sarah said she's been part of the agentic AI recruitment process recently. They're not good, so I hope Shaun will be able to change that perspective, but then let's see.
Okay, just as a follow-up, when you say not good, what is it do you actually mean in terms of not good? As in, it'd be interesting to sort of see what you've seen from trying to work with different either suppliers or models or ways of using it that hasn't worked out good. But put that back in the chat and I can come back to that later if you like. But yeah, so the other one, obviously, if you're using Zapier, one of the routes people go with is starting to experiment internally themselves. And I think a lot of organizations initially started to go to things like Zapier, N8N, tools that allowed you to actually build agents yourself, which is good from an early adoption, education, self-education kind of point. But I think corporations are now more increasingly looking at whether they build it themselves or whether they bring in tools and technology that already exists. So again, typical thing with when an early technology comes to the market, comes to an industry, people play around with themselves, but ultimately less people end up building themselves and they end up buying in those expertise. There's a lot of startups, there's a lot of tech companies that have kind of risen out of this AI adoption piece. There's companies that purely build AI agents for companies. There's companies that will do your automation for you. There's companies that will redo your workflows, tidy up your data. So a lot of the things that you would necessarily want to do yourself in-house, there are now so many startups. There's so many small companies that are taking individual pieces of this and doing this for companies. So in a lot of cases, especially for sort of smaller or mid-sized organizations where that level of investment in time, resource and cost can sometimes be a bit too much, building an ecosystem or building like a partner network around that tends to be what a lot of companies will look at doing, at least for parts of that. I know organizations like Alpha Tame, I'm not sure if we have anybody from Alpha Tame on the call, but Alpha Tame have gone down the kind of build route, but they're obviously a massive organization with a lot of resources, and they can afford to kind of, you know, create teams just looking at building this themselves. But even with their side, they're still looking at an ecosystem where they bring in organizations and companies that can help them for certain parts. So yeah, it's a very good learning piece. I myself had a little dive down the rabbit hole doing this when all this first came out, and it does really help you get an understanding of trying to do this yourself. It's whether or not that then is fit for purpose from a corporate point of view. That sometimes is then the next blocker, but yeah, it's a good exploration. So what is AI in hiring, and what can we use it for? So typically, as I said, where AI is useful in the most common senses across TA are in areas where you have highly repeatable tasks that are consistent, that are based on standard workflows. So if you think about an AI agent, think about it as a digital employee for a second. If you were bringing in a human employee, say for example you're in a recruitment team, you're a recruitment manager or a recruiter, and you're bringing in a junior recruiter or a sourcer or a scheduler, someone in a TA function, you would typically bring that person in, you would do an induction, and that induction would mean that you would train them on what the company is, how it works, what the processes are, and what their role is and how that fits into the processes. You'd provide them with all the information around the company, so policies, procedures, how they do things, what to do in certain instances, what type of people you're looking to hire, what the business managers are like in terms of the hiring managers, all those kind of things. And you train that person, and then you would let them obviously run the process and do their job. That is exactly the same process that you would go through when you're looking to adopt and implement agents. The difference being that with an agent, they work off all that information from a data source. So one of the biggest and most boring, to be quite frank, pieces that companies are spending a lot of time on is making sure their data is absolutely 100% accurate. Because if you have two policies that say two different things, the agent is not going to know which one to use. In the same way that a human might not know, if you give them two different versions of a policy, which policy is correct. So a lot of the barriers to swift adoption at the moment are around organizations not being ready to implement agents, because the data and the workflows have to be updated, checked, quality checked. And a lot of organizations, data, especially from an HR point of view, tends to be an area that's a lot of HR organizations struggle with to get kind of really clean and really accurate. So nothing to do with the actual tech itself. It's moving from that legacy environment to an AI environment. And this is one of the key kind of stumbling blocks that some companies come across and sometimes underestimate. So anyway, but in terms of sort of the areas, these are some of the areas that you can tend to find a lot of the optimization, but the human element is still really important. So especially with a lot of the regulations coming out in the rest of the world, which I'll talk about in a minute, there are human touch points that have to be in that process. So the humans in the loop, as I say, are the ones that will make the decisions in terms of judgment calls, verification on what is being done, and making sure that that final decision, that final kind of judgment call is in the human place rather than in the AI place. So a really easy example on that is if a AI is doing all your sourcing for you, provides a long list, scores, ranks candidates, and sends you a shortlist, that shortlist should not go to the hiring manager directly. It should be reviewed by a human before it goes. Because there's various things that may mean that shortlist isn't the right shortlist. It may have screened out candidates that you should have screened in, or it may have included candidates that you should have screened out. So, and as you go through that iterative process of training your agent in the same way that you would train a human, there needs to be a kind of supervisory layer that is quality checking all these pieces at key touch points, if that makes sense. And then one of the newer areas which in TA needs to start looking at is then looking at the governance and the guardrails around this. So how are we managing these agents? If you were managing humans, you'd be managing through a performance management process, appraisals, checking their work. Similar kind of concept when you're looking at AI agents, but you're doing different things. So you're looking at things like fairness, bias, compliance to local laws and regulations, and how the information that you're feeding to that agent is making sure it's doing the right activity and giving you the right outputs. Again, quick pause there. Any questions on that piece before I move on? All good?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So this is a very short kind of overview on how this all comes together. So like I said before, you have the two kind of groups. You have the recruiters at the human level, and you have the AI talent agents or agents at the agent level. Those two groups are working together to then run that end-to-end process. So everything from the kind of manpower plan, job brief, all the way through to the offer, onboarding, and kind of the start. Key thing here is that the agent is doing a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the kind of high volume repeatable tasks, while the human is almost like the project manager slash the sort of supervisor, who is making sure that's happening in the right way, making those judgment calls, making those decisions, and then guiding the agent or the workflow to improve, or to that's done correctly, do it again, or no, you haven't quite got this right, let's go back, let's feed back to the agent, and then move it on again. So the more and more you start thinking about agents as digital employees, the more and more the same things you're doing for human teams makes sense when you start to put it into the sense of working with agents. It's a very kind of easy way to think about it. I mentioned governance. I don't know if anybody has been keeping an eye on all the regulations that have been coming out around AI, and a lot of this is coming out of the US and the European area at the moment, because they're the ones that seem to have kind of had a head start on regulations. I won't do a show of hands because I can't see the hands, but I don't know who has sort of an awareness of this. But for those that aren't aware, Eightfold is an AI platform. It's primarily a sourcing tool, so a lot of companies, it's a large enterprise piece of software that the companies use to help them direct source candidates. So it's mainly used for direct sourcing, and it enables companies to essentially have this platform manage all their sourcing, screening, and shortlisting activity. So everything you need to find candidates up until the point you decide you want to forward them to a hiring manager, for example. Now, the governance lesson here is that there is a very high-profile legal case happening in the US where a number of individuals in a group are suing Eightfold because they were being screened out, in their view, unfairly by the Eightfold agents without any notice, consent, or reasons why. Now, this is an interesting one because it's not actually a data protection piece. It's actually something that is being sued under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is the same act that looks at consumer reports. So when you get your credit scores, for example, and the case is basically saying that you cannot take my information and independently rank me like a sort of credit bureau would rank my credit score without getting my consent to do so. So it's not necessarily about actually the candidate being identified. It's more the credit scoring, or the scoring of them in terms of match scores. And this is actually done with Microsoft. So that the individuals that are suing Eightfold have sued them through the use of Eightfold that was being done at Microsoft. Now, this isn't an AI specific piece. This is a data governance piece that you would still have if you're using an ATS. So, for example, in an ATS, for those of you that have ATSs, when you were passing resumes from candidates that you found online or through kind of direct sourcing, you would still need to get their consent to add them to your ATS and to kind of use their data essentially. And that is a very simple thing to do because typically in ATSs there's a consent pop-up, right? So normally if you're applying to an ATS, you normally get a pop-up saying something very simple like, you apply to our ATS, you consent to your data being shared with an organization for X, Y, and Z. The problem is that that's not being done across an agentic piece where agents are contacting or scraping data from the internet on 500,000 and million profiles. There's no pop-up ability on that piece like you have with an ATS. So the issue isn't necessarily a unique issue. It's just that now that AI is contacting or reviewing so many candidates in the way that it's working, it's been amplified in terms of these examples where people are being scored. The other piece on this is obviously, as I've mentioned just now, is that if an AI agent is selecting, screening, and shortlisting candidates straight to hiring manager with no human in the loop, then yes, you have an issue, because you're relying on the decision to be made by an AI agent, not a human, and therefore that's where another element of risk comes in, and that is the basis of the case against Eightfold, essentially. It's been going on for about 6 months. It'd be interesting to see what the outcome is, but I suspect that the outcome will lead to organisations having more formalised guardrails in, and more consent-driven communications to candidates built into the systems. This isn't an issue if you're applying to a role. It's only an issue where you're using agents to go out into the wider internet to source candidate data from various public available information. So I hope that makes sense. Any questions on that piece? There's a few other lawsuits that are being done with other AI agent companies, all on the similar kind of basis, where organizations haven't been using the agents correctly in terms of not having humans in the loop, and kind of missing that step. I think that is something that is going to be a key compliance piece that all countries will start to have to look at going forward. At the moment, it's mainly a UK-US issue, but it's starting to become more prevalent in other countries as they kind of pick up the standard from the US and the UK Europe areas. Any questions on this one? Any thoughts? Anybody come across this themselves if they're using AI, where you've had issues around candidates raising concerns about being screened or selected using AI?
Yeah, I think Sarah has experience, like as a not experience, she's seen this. Sarah, if you can just unmute and then share your experience. So.
Sure. So I did an interview for a project with a company for a project-based role, and it was an AI tool that was apparently took created its questions from the job description, so it knew the geographic region and what have you. Obviously time bound as well, and it was a conversation asking questions, except it didn't understand my English. So it kept rephrasing a question and asking the same question again because it didn't understand me. And then it would skip on, but also it would freeze. So there was no in-interview support where I can flag up and say, well, there was, and I flagged it up and said, hey, there's a problem, because the AI tool just hung, wouldn't respond to anything I was saying. And it did this 3 or 4 times in the space of 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And I've had part of this is on the company, because they obviously have, and what makes me laugh is it's an AI company that reckons it's going to hire 2 billion people through using AI tools and agentic stuff in the next year. I'm like, that's just not going to happen. And questions that it was asking were not geographically sound. So it was asking about legislation that related to the US and not the UAE, even though the position was based in the UAE. Some of it goes down to the company, obviously, in the setup. When it hung, it ate away at the 20-minute time frame, so there was no extension to that. And then my application was automatically rejected, which is fine. I requested feedback, which was given by the AI tool, that when it gave, yes, we picked up on this, no, we didn't get this, we didn't hear you saying that. And I'm like, but you didn't understand half of what I was saying. So how can you actively recognize what I'm, my answers? And it did have, because I read all of the terms and conditions and what have you before proceeding with the interview, because I'm cautious about understanding all of this. And it said, want a human review, ask for one and we'll do it. I said, okay, fine. So I asked the AI tool, can I have a human review? I've now asked them 4 times and not had any response.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, this is the problem with this technology that is still emerging. Interesting that it was actually an AI company, because a lot of the companies that are providing these agents, a lot of them actually aren't using it themselves for their own interview processes. So, and at the moment, a lot of the stuff that we see, and even some of the customers that we kind of work with now, we don't necessarily actually recommend them using it for actual interview purposes at the moment. It's still so new. There's so many companies out there that have just basically cloned a large language model like a Gemini or a Perplexity or a ChatGPT and just basically applied it to their company. So there's a lot of missteps and a lot of laziness, quite frankly, in terms of how people are implementing these. So again, things like geographic coverage being not correct, That's just, again, the data hasn't been fed into it, so that the agent hasn't been trained correctly. In terms of the hang-in piece, I mean, that's just pure tech infrastructure. I don't know how an AI company would manage to have an issue with bandwidth for the agents. But yeah, there's a lot of horror stories at the moment because there's so many people jumping on this bandwagon. There's literally hundreds of, and because you've got this AI piece now, it is very feasible for a single individual to create themselves an AI agent company, using all these tools and creating the product themselves, and that creates a lot of issues for organizations or companies buying these products, because there just is there's no benchmark and there's very little barrier to entry for a lot of these companies. So yeah, it sounds like a bit of a nightmare experience, but very surprising it's with a large AI company, because typically they have got better with things. But yeah, I mean, I would simply advise them not to be using it for interviews. I'd be advising them to use it for other pieces, less kind of critical areas first, make sure that works, and then start to go down the interview piece, because it's ultimately AI interviewing candidates is going to be the last piece that is adopted and seen as kind of normal, the latest. That will be the last thing that people will get used to, because at the moment, no one particularly wants to be interviewed by an AI because of all the reasons you kind of said, right? So companies trying to do that first off the bat is just, it's not going to work very well. And also, actually, the bottlenecks you tend to find in TA aren't actually at the interview stage. You know, there's a lot more useful applications of that agent in stages outside of the interview stage. The interview stage is still a very human-centric experience. So, you know, using that as your first kind of point of experimentation is probably not a good idea. But yeah.
Yeah, there are lots of things about it, because they wanted my webcam on, which is fine, not a problem. But they then wanted me to share my entire screen of my computer to prove that I wasn't using AI to help answer the questions.
Yeah,
which I thought was quite funny, that they can't even get the questions right in the first place themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another thing actually, which I think I might cover later on, but we can talk about is that you have these you have kind of like an anxiety from companies around is this person real, or is this person an AI? Because again, with any new technology, typically the people that kind of pick this up and run with it first are either the criminal populations or candidates. So yeah, candidates will be far more savvy and are far more savvy around using AI to help them find a job than companies are in terms of trying to stop them. So there are companies that are kind of getting a little bit heavy-handed with how they think they can manage the "are you a real person" piece. But again, that will just get better over time as things get around. But yeah, if you're a candidate out there interviewing for jobs and you see an AI, then yeah, it's probably not going to be the best experience right now. We're still only kind of a couple of years into this, and there's a lot of work to do. Cool. All right, that's an interesting one. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments, or I'll move on if not?
No, nothing yet.
All good? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So what can you do? So here's a couple of quick things that I've kind of mentioned, but I'll kind of just summarize them here. So these are some of the things that you can do in terms of a practical application of how you would minimize these pieces. So like I said, just-in-time consent. ATSs have this now. You have applicant pop-ups. You know, are you fine? Do you submit consent? As long as you're asking for consent, a candidate applies for a job. If you want to apply, you have to give consent to your information being shared. That's just par for the course. Same thing with AI agents. You just have to do that just-in-time consent at the point of collecting their data or collecting their interest, or whatever that might be. Minimize the data. Only collect what you absolutely need to collect. Again, with these agents, a lot of the bias that's built in is because people try and collect too much data. So, for example, even things like gender, it doesn't necessarily need to collect gender information. It doesn't need to collect nationality or heritage information. Those things will only help increase bias because of the way that AI reads data the same way across everything. So you're only collecting what is essential for the job. A transparency layer, so making sure that there's, in this other case that was mentioned, it sounds like they were doing this, but not necessarily doing it in the best way, is giving notices. This is an AI interview. This is we screen using AI tools. You if you are not happy to do this, you can request a human kind of review, etc. So the concept there is right. Obviously the execution can be sometimes lacking. Placement optimization, so again, similar to just-in-time consent, making sure that you're reconfirming and confirming a candidate's acceptance of sharing data or being part of an AI-enabled process during that piece. And the final thing which more companies are starting to do now is they're starting to create or have teams or individuals or areas that are responsible for doing audits on these. So audits of the fairness, the bias, the effectiveness, the output of these AI agents, in the same way that you might do kind of an audit of a function with humans, right? It's just, again, there's a little bit more complexity around it when you're dealing with agents and systems and workflows. So, but same concept. So those 5 things, if you can tick all those boxes in terms of how you're managing your agent processes, you're getting close to being pretty well covered in terms of governance issues or escalations that will come out of you starting to adopt it. Any questions on that one? If so, just drop them in the chat. So what does all this mean for TA teams, recruiters? Are we all going to end up finding new jobs, setting up into the sunset and sitting on beaches with cocktails? Probably not, at least not for the next 5 to 10 years. What will happen though is that because so much of the recruitment process, and I'm talking maybe 65–70% of the process as it is now, could be theoretically managed better, quicker, and arguably in a more quality way than kind of humans right now. The roles of the humans within TA will change quite significantly over time. There's still going to be a massive dependence on humans for certain areas, which AI is not going to replace anytime soon, but that's going to mean new types of TA roles. And what I mean by that is, well, before I come on to this, those new types of TA roles will mean things that humans can still do that AI can't, and probably won't be able to for a while. So this is something which is called the CARE meta competencies. These are the 4 things which are seen to be the most difficult things for AI to replace in any human-led kind of process or thing, not just TA. This could be anywhere in any application of AI into a role. These 4 competencies, essentially, or behaviors, are the pieces that are most difficult to replicate in AI, and are probably going to mean that these are the areas where humans in the loop in these systems are going to provide the most value and the most input. So again, all these kind of doomsayers that talk about roles are going to disappear and TA functions won't exist. I think if you have these 4 pieces, or you can develop these 4 areas more, then this will kind of hold you in good stead, because a lot of these areas are things which will be replaced not now and not for a very long time. So team structures and roles. So based on that, again, if I go back to Kevin Wheeler, our TA futurist, there's a number of things that he says will probably shift, and I tend to agree, because we see this in the companies. So TA, people working in TA teams will need to start becoming more like these types of roles. So at the moment, probably in a typical TA function, not a lot of this is a focus of the role, right? The focus is operational delivery, managing the process, managing candidates, managing hiring managers, managing roles, managing the process to get those candidates on board. In a new world where that process is predominantly managed through agents or digital employees, then the skill sets for the humans in the loop become more around these 3 pieces. So people that can understand technology, can understand how that technology is being applied for and used across a function to get the output it needs. So essentially, when I talk technology specialists here, this is the equivalent of being a hiring manager in TA. You're not managing humans anymore, you're managing agents. You're managing workflows, and you're managing data sets that inform those workflows. Marketing and communications. So again, how are you building brands? How are you building awareness, visibility, being able to then create that talent pool for the agents to then go out and attract people and to run that process. So again, the brand piece is still something that is going to be very human led. And the final piece, again, which a lot of TA functions historically have not been particularly strong at. Some companies are, but everywhere I've worked, the reporting, the MI, the analysis tends to be less than you would see in other business functions. People that really understand analytics, understand data, manipulate data, look at what that's telling you and draw insights from it. will be able to be better prepared than people who don't have that sort of ability. So these three areas are areas of focus for TA individuals to kind of develop. And if you're already strong in these areas, then again, these will hold you in good stead as you start to play around with AI agents, start to manage them, and start to kind of educate your peers on how to best make good use of these agent systems. Quick pause. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any agreements or disagreements? All good? Okay.
Yeah.
So along with that, this is the piece that is starting to get talked about more and more. Metrics, KPIs, SLAs. Obviously, all TA functions have SLAs, KPIs. What's your time to hire? What's your cost per hire? How quickly is things happening? Why are we getting dropouts here, there, and everywhere? A lot of those KPIs are going to become not redundant, but they're going to become largely more and more relevant as time goes on and organizations start using agentic AI agents. Reason for that is that there's more things to now consider when you're looking at this. So if I take time to fill as a legacy KPI, typically most organizations will have time to fill as one number. Some companies will have it by one number per job type. So you might have senior roles at, I don't know, 6 days per hire, mid-level roles at 14, junior roles at say 20, for example. When you now need to look at that in a much more granular level, and you need to look at things from a decision stage, so time per stage. So you're not looking at time to fill anymore, like offer from job briefing, for example. You now need to look at where the process is giving you a bottleneck. So time to decision is something you look at per stage. So if agents run 24/7, fill times don't really make a difference anymore. So what you need to look at is the efficiency of the process. Where is the agent getting it right? So again, for example, what's the time from sourcing the candidates from a briefing to getting the shortlist ready? What is the shortlist conversion rate? So how many shortlists do they send versus how many CVs are accepted from the ones they've sent? What's the time between the shortlist being sent to the feedback getting back from the line manager to go to interview? What's the time between a hiring manager saying yes to arrange an interview to the agent being able to successfully arrange that interview? So you're looking at more granular time-based metrics. And alongside that as well, which I haven't put here, are more conversion-based metrics. So for those of you kind of looking at time-based metrics, the other one that normally goes alongside this is conversion-based metrics, so ratios. So like I said before, CV shortlist ratio. I send 10 CVs, human line manager accepts 6 of them, 6% conversion rate. Agent sends 10 CVs, hiring manager says yes to 2 of them, 20% conversion rate. Something's wrong with the way that you trained that agent to go out and find those people. So conversion metrics, I actually kind of think are the better one to use with agents because it shows output rather than effort, if you like. Whereas time is more a production of effort. The next one's here. So add the across TA functions, unless anyone can challenge me otherwise. Typically, the cost of your team's fully loaded cost in terms of salaries. Now you're looking at a lot more costs in that process. So you're looking at the one-off costs for your agents being onboarded. You're looking at the licensing costs and also the compute. So if you think about agents spending time on activities, each of those activities costs tokens in the same way that you spend tokens when you're using ChatGPT to ask it a question. Now you're getting hundreds of thousands of tokens for like $1, but some of the activities that these agents are performing, and because they're on 24/7, they're using millions and millions of tokens a day. So that might only translate to $5 or $10 a day, but that cost has to be counted in because it does make a difference over time, whether you're talking to 500,000 candidates a month, 1 million candidates a month versus a human cost of a fully loaded employment cost. So there's now kind of a more detail that needs to be looked at and more things to consider when you look at cost per hire. Recruiter decision loads, that becomes not how many roles is a recruiter dealing with, but how many decisions or how many key stages is that recruiter managing. So again, that number will probably go up because typically with a 3x productivity increase, we can see one recruiter potentially dealing with up to 60 roles at any one time. If you think about typical recruiter rec loads, they go anything from sort of 10 roles at any one time for say senior positions, 40 roles a time if you're looking at kind of white collar, blue collar, and high volume blue collar hiring. With a 3x productivity increase as an average for companies that are getting this right, your recruiter can now deal with 3 times as many roles and do less of the sourcing, do less of the admin, and spend more time on decisions. So it's those decisions that need to be tracked and managed and looked at rather than the activity overall. And last one, the source of hire. So it no longer really matters where you get your person from, because multi-channel agents search everywhere at once. So unless you're paying for specific subscription pieces, which is then easy to look at kind of your return on investment, you now need to look at what your agent is contributing across the board. So again, your conversion metrics come into play here and become far more important when you're looking at what is the output versus what is the input, which is the source of hire essentially. So you start to look at your scorecards and your metrics, have the same themes, but start to look and feel very different and need some work in terms of how you build those to then take account of the fact that you're managing agentic agents rather than humans essentially. I hope that makes a bit of sense. There's 3 others that I'll jump to again, and I'll kind of any questions you've got on this. This is a bit of a trending topic at the moment, but there's new metrics which need to be looked at as well. So these are ones that we would not have really looked at before in TA, which now are becoming ones that need to be measured. The first one is actually now a mandatory measurement for a lot of companies in the United States where they're using AI agents, and this is something called adverse impact ratio, and this is to do with fairness and bias. So this is basically checking that the AI is not being overly biased in its selection of candidates, for example, be that when they're sourcing, when they're screening, or even when they're in the sense the lady that was speaking, doing an interview. And that is very simply a if I have X number of applicants that are male, X number of applicants that are female, what is that ratio? And in the US, the NYC local law 44, which is 144, which is the main AI regulation law that's in place at the moment, actually mandates a threshold, and it's 0.8%. So anything below that is a flag that is part of the audit. So that is one new metric that from a TA point of view has to now be measured from an AI side in the States. And typically a lot of these kind of benchmarks and industry standards start in the States and filter their way across the world. So these will start to become more and more things to consider, both here and other countries globally. Fraud flag rate, again, whether the candidate is real. So again, this is something that needs to be tracked and compared. Again, a very simple calculation. It's just the verification pass rate, candidates that are genuine versus candidates that are being verified as fraud. So that then just gives you a very simple fraud flag rate to tell you how many of the candidates that you're screening, interviewing, or even selecting for interview are real or fake. And that gives you then a number to hold as a benchmark to then look at how your process and what you're doing to mitigate those. Interestingly, Gartner says that 1 in 4 candidate profiles will be fake by 2028. That's only 2 years away for 25% of your total talent pool to not be human. And over a quarter of companies already report in identity fraud among new hires. So we're not just talking about now individuals who are getting other people to do their tests for them or putting an avatar face in front of them to make them look like a different gender or a different nationality. You've got actual agents doing these interviews for individuals. So yeah, there is a big piece on this at the moment. There's a company called Warden.ai based out of the UK who is very current on this, and they tend to be a bit of an authority on verification and fraud flags. So if anybody is looking at this as a key issue, Warden.ai is worth looking at, and they're very specifically only deal with helping companies looking at how to manage fraud and verification. But they're very current at the moment, and they do a lot of good stuff. Last one is human override rate. So this is when do your humans in the loop actually properly review what's been done. So again, I'll give you an example for a company we started doing some diagnostic work. So we went in to do a full audit diagnostic of their TA function to look at how ready they were to adopt AI, what their processes were, how they might kind of change that model, change their operating model to kind of move to an AI enabled solution. And And what they were actually doing was they had a piece of AI technology they were using to source, screen, rank candidates, but that AI tool was submitting shortlists directly to hiring managers. So in their eyes, I thought that was highly efficient. You know, they weren't even getting involved until the interview stage. So they were still doing the interviews, still interviewing the candidates, but everything up until that point, a human never touched. The issue with that is that, you know, if you go back to our governance piece on the eightfold case, that is a prime risk for candidates to, you know, sue, you know, complain that the decision to put them forward to a hiring manager was not made by a human. The human checked that. So your human override rate is when humans are in the loop checking that, how many of them actually check and either accept or reject versus what's been put through as a shortlist recommendation. And you need to track both directions. So you need to track when the AI is getting it wrong, so the humans actually pull the AI agent up and say, actually, no, you've sent 6, 2 of those are not relevant. Let's track that. That is a 4 in 6, 66% success rate in terms of shortlist. But you also need to look at when the human actually verifies and takes candidates out of the process that they actually get wrong. So it may well be that the AI sends 6 candidates, the human reviews and takes out 2, but actually those 2 people would have been relevant. And in some cases, there are instances where, because the AI agents are looking at things on a much more holistic level, they're putting in candidates that are relevant for the role, but not based on some of the legacy criteria that human and old TA teams used to use. And the easiest example to give there is education, right? So you tend to find this feeds into something I'll talk about in a minute around skills-based hiring. You tend to find that AI agents are weirdly less biased around certain things, but obviously very biased around others. And that points to the data you feed in it, right? So if you're feeding it gender data, it's going to be biased based on the data you feed it. If it doesn't have that data, it's going to be relatively unbiased. So you might find, for example, a TA role, and it might put in a project manager for a TA role who's never done anything in TA, because the skill sets that project manager is doing very, very closely match the workflow of a recruiter. But because they've never done a recruitment role before, that might get taken out by a human, for example. And that's a very extreme example. But yeah, other things around, if you want a degree in X, Y, and Z, but they fit in terms of experience, the AI might put them in. A legacy, old school recruiter might take them out because they haven't got a degree, or a hiring manager might reject them because they haven't got a degree. That is one of the other shifts that Kevin Wheeler makes in his predictions, and one of the things that again we start seeing more, which is that skills-based hiring is going to become more of a standard. People will stop looking at things like years of experience and educational records as markers for success in recruitment, because they are, quite frankly, outdated and again introduce too many levels of bias. There's other ways to denote competence than looking at years of experience and degrees. So those two things will start to become much less relevant in an AI-enabled world, where you're able to look at skills, experience, and again have an agent look at all the data across the board rather than just looking at a degree, for example. Any questions on those? Because those are 3 new metrics that I'm guessing. Well, I could be wrong.
Yeah, we do have one question, Shaun. So David has asked, what is a solution when 4,000 people apply for a role? Though
in a human world at the moment, there is no solution, because obviously if you're a recruiter managing 4,000 applications, you're not going to be able to get through 4,000 applications. So what tends to happen is you probably spend a day going through the responses, get to about 200, and probably then just take what you've got from the 200 and send everybody else a rejection email. The good thing about using agents is that the agent will be able to review all 2,000 or 4,000 of those candidates. It can also manage the communications back to those candidates, and can also feedback in terms of whether they were good, bad, ugly, and then filter them into your talent pools for future use. Which again, if you're a human recruiter, realistically, you're probably not going to have the time to do that if you've got 20 other roles to try and fill. The flip side to that is then you have to then manage that experience of the candidates properly. So if you've got an agent managing 4,000 screens, well, you'll have a better output than if you were doing it on a human basis. So I guess, what is the solution to having 4,000 candidates apply? I mean, there is no kind of one answer solution to that, other than if you're using this technology in the right way, you're doing a much better job of candidate engagement and candidate experience than you would be as a pure human, right? I mean, I don't know what sort of types of roles everyone on the call here looks at, but I imagine it's not uncommon for you to post a role to LinkedIn, for example, and the average, I think, is about 200 plus applications for even very specific white collar roles. So your LinkedIn, just on the LinkedIn one channel that you're looking at, can get like 200, 300 applications. I had a colleague who was recruiting for an HR business partner for a small energy company, and within 4 hours of them posting the role, they had 180 profiles that had applied. They didn't have time to look at those 180 profiles. And that's why candidate experience kind of gets a bit of a bad rep from an AI perspective, because yes, it's an AI piece. And yes, people have sort of hesitations around doing things like interviews, but from a screening point of view, it does a much better job than humans can do. Humans just don't simply have enough time to screen or review 200 CVs when they've got 20 of the roles. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or if there's a follow-up there you want to sort of chat through, but yeah.
Any other questions? No.
All good?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Fine. So finally, what that then builds into is your TA function starts to become a bit more of an ecosystem. Kevin starts to call them talent factories. And some of the things that he talks about, again, here are 3 things that will become more prevalent within TA functions. Internal mobility, as I talked about before, there'll be more of a focus on internal mobility, making better use of internal talent, which historically HR and TA functions don't do as well as looking at external talent, typically, in a lot of instances. Skills-based hiring, as I mentioned, skills-based hiring relies on you being able to pull together lots of hiring data, lots of employee data from different sets of areas. That's becoming a lot more easy to do now with agents. They can spend that time, they can do that far quicker than we can. Data manipulation, data collection, data grouping, data analysis, etc. It can be done in minutes versus the hours it would take a human. So that is becoming far more of a realistic thing for companies to do on a regular basis with no impact to productivity or time. And then finally, workforce planning. So as we again use these agents to do a lot of these tasks quicker and faster, and we have more data at our fingertips, you can spend actually more time, and you'll actually be able to be more predictive around what you need. We have, I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff that's was in the press about 6-8 months ago with Emirates. Emirates tout they have a 0 time to shortlist because they've been able to use AI tools to essentially give themselves a 0 time to shortlist, because they are now using predictive models to look at attrition rates, workforce plans for the last 10 years, and then they have always on sourcing channels and interviewing campaigns that basically predict when these roles are going to come up, how many of them will come up on a monthly basis, and enable them to provide shortlists on the instant the role is created. Never going to be able to do that with human teams. TA historically is a very reactive function, right? So being able to become that proactive, that predictive, workforce planning will start to become a much bigger focus and priority for teams going forward. And that's only going to be a good thing if you can start to really work in some of these areas. These are areas that most TA functions don't have the luxury of time to focus on. But if you're able to, these are things that can make a real difference in terms of both business credibility, working with hiring managers. These are sorts of things that hiring managers and CEOs and MDs are interested in. A lot of times they're not interested in the process or all the reasons why things can happen. They're interested in the output and what's going to happen next and how we're going to manage that. So a lot of that predictive piece is going to be really useful and will help elevate TA teams that have traditionally been kind of more reactive. So yeah, interesting. Again, I would do a raised hands, but it'd be interesting to see how many of you currently manage internal mobility as well as TA, and if there's obviously HR individuals in the call as well. How much of your time is spent doing internal mobility? Because typically that's something that then gets you get dragged into when a role is being looked at, and that can sometimes be another issue where you've got two different HR teams essentially doing the same thing, both trying to fill a role, but without necessarily the kind of alignment to be able to do so well. So I think that is going to be something that will definitely improve over the course of time. Any thoughts, questions, comments on this before I kind of move on? We're almost at the end.
All good. Nothing yet.
Perfect. Okay. So again, a small thing here, just as a typical org structure. So this is where we kind of see things moving to. So you'll still have potentially a human in the loop here. You'll still potentially have humans in the loop here. So your top end levels, your partners and your leads will still be humans. A lot of things below that will start to become agent-led. So a talent partner that's maybe more supporting a lead or an end-to-end recruiter, sourcing specialist talent coordinators, all these pieces around insights, these will all remain human. Project manager type roles where they're managing the process, managing those digital agents will all be human. But this piece here, which is the kind of layer around where the vast amount of activity happens, so sourcing, screening, interview coordination, document collection, offer matching, etc. A lot of those things can be done by agents. So a slight difference to how kind of the teams are getting put together. And one of the things obviously we're seeing from an RPO perspective, because obviously in my role we work with organizations to essentially either part or fully outsource their recruitment functions or augment existing functions. We're having to move quicker because a lot of clients are asking us to replace our human teams with hybrid teams. So where before we might have a company where we have a team of 5 people on site running recruitment for various areas, now we can do that with 2 with agents. So there's a quality increase and there's a headcount increase, which means reduced costs for that customer. So a lot of our PO companies, a lot of managed service companies are starting to adopt this quicker than corporates in order to be able to then keep ahead of the game essentially. And then finally, just as a
question, we've got one question from Zainab, which says, what skills would an orchestration project manager in this kind of environment need to have?
So again, orchestration project manager is a very fancy title that one of my AI directors kind of coined, but essentially this is the person that is managing the agent workforce. So if you think about it as the same kind of role as a recruitment manager managing a bunch of recruiters, this person is orchestrating or managing the agent workforce. So whether that's a sourcing agent, a screening agent, a onboarding agent, them managing those agent systems as if they were digital employees, making sure that the process they're following is correct, the workflows are the right workflows, and that the data that's being fed into how that workflow should look and feel is correct, and then enable the agent to do what they need to be doing. And then there's the reinforcement loop, which is the continuous learning. The same way you kind of continually train an employee is as you get the results from that agent, feeding it back to them and say, yes, that was right, that was wrong, etc. So essentially an orchestration project manager is essentially the hiring manager equivalent of a recruitment manager. But you're working with the systems, the workflows, the agents themselves. So again, thinking about it like a digital employee, you're managing digital employees. So I'm conscious of time here. We seem to have gone over quite a lot, which I didn't realize we'd done. So the final thing here just to look at is if you were starting to look at this now, these are some of the 4 things that you would potentially start to look at. Essentially, as some of you may have already been doing, identify a key challenge, just start experimenting, start playing around, start looking at how these things could potentially work. Start looking at your data foundation. One of the biggest blockers is not having data clean and ready to be able to then train these systems and train these agents. Looking at how you identify talent by moving to more of a skills-based hiring piece rather than sort of a legacy education marker piece, and start looking from a personal perspective of where you can start developing your skills to align more to an AI-enabled world where you're moving to managing systems, agents, and workflows versus people. So those are kind of like 4 very simple things to start looking at doing. And that is kind of a bit of a closing statement around this piece. I'll pause here. I know we've kind of run over a little bit, but open to any thoughts, questions, feedback, things that are kind of top of mind that I haven't covered in this or anything that wasn't clear during the session. Please feel free to shout out, let me know, or put it in the chat. But that is kind of my piece. I will pause and see what we have in the group.
So we have a follow-up question on the orchestration project manager skill.
Yep.
So it would be technical agentic AI skills, and would it also require AI safety and or AI governance skills too?
Yes, to a certain extent. So if I go back to this, now obviously most organizations aren't going to have all these people necessarily as one FTE, right? So you might have, for example, this orchestration project manager, insights and talent as one person. That's possible. But yes, essentially this orchestration project manager is responsible for that team, if you like. I'm going to call it a team. To perform. So it would include the safety piece, which was around fairness and bias. It would include pieces around governance, so the reporting and the analysis around are the team performing? Are they doing it correctly? Are they following the right process? Is the output they're providing the same? So in the same way, again, that you would train a team in terms of, are you following the process? Did you read the policy manual on TA? Are you following that policy? Are you telling the hiring manager, this is our policies? Do you understand our policies? Same principle with your agents. And this is kind of the thing that kind of a lot of the teams that we kind of train on this start to kind of understand a bit. It's, if you think about these agents as digital employees, the same way that you would manage a team of individuals in a human TA team, it's exactly the same as you would manage them in an AI world. It's just slightly different in terms of what form that takes, but the concept and the themes that you're managing are the same, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yep. We have another question. What's the role of COEs? Won't the analyst support functions also be AI enabled or agentic?
Yes, good question. And probably some point in the future, yes. But for the moment, what those enablement COEs are teams or individuals that are very knowledgeable. So if I go back to the piece around, TA functions or TA individuals need to start understanding the technology. These are people that would know enough about that domain area, but also enough about the technology and the AI agent tools that are being used in this area to know how to use them and how to deploy them. So for example, we have a talent intelligence team that is a team of humans, but they are using 6 or 7 different talent intelligence agents from various sources or even some specialist vendors that we partner with, to then deploy them and how to deploy them into organizations. So some might be suitable for large enterprise, some might be suitable for startups, some might be suitable purely for certain industry areas. So we have the humans who are the specialists in those areas that have deep knowledge around what's out there, and then they're using those pieces of tech, tools, agents, to then do that for the client. So again, if you think about, I want to hire a team to run talent intelligence, that team might need to be 4 people. Okay, well, it doesn't need to be 4 people. It's 1 person managing a team of agents. You just have a person that knows how to work with the technology. So they're going to be technology savvy and understand what tools and tech they need to basically enable them to have a team without having a team of humans, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else? So that was a whistle stop tour. I know we've run over a little bit on time, but as I mentioned, there's a lot more in this area that is going to come out, and I'm sure there's going to be, as you go through, lots of questions that you'll have around when you start to apply and adopt these things, or if you're starting to use them already, kind of how that goes for you as you kind of expand it across different parts of the process. But yeah, feel free to reach out post this if there's any questions that you might have. I'm happy to take anything offline, and also obviously I think we'll be able to share this deck with you as well if you want this for any sort of information purposes. But yeah, any final thoughts or questions before we finish up the session?
I think no more questions on the chat. Okay. If you guys want to unmute, you can ask the questions directly. We'll give it a minute.
There we go. I'll just stop sharing. There we go. I'm back. I'll put my camera on. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you so much. That was genuinely useful. A lot to take away there, for sure. And I think for people who want to understand more about, help you with adoption, I think you can always reach out to Shaun post the session. I'm for the crowd as well, thanks everyone for spending time with us. We'll see you at the next one. Take care. We'll be sharing the recordings with you. It'll be there on our Bayzat Community's webpage. All the documents, the deck and the recordings will be sent across over there. So, and that you will be getting it across as a link as well. So yeah, watch out for that and see you for the next one. Thank you so much, guys.
Perfect. And thanks everyone for attending. Look forward to maybe speaking to some of you in the future. Thank you. And thank you, Sapana.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Goodbye.